What's up, guys? Ben here, bringing you another video today. We're going to continue our off-season preview series. We are going to cover the New York Cloud9ers, Cloud9 New York, whatever they're being called. Obviously, they got a little bit of an org name change. I think the team should mostly stay the same, although there are a few things we should discuss. With an interesting off-season coming up for the squad, let's take a look at how they did this season and what I think they should do going forward. So, as a refresher, the New York Subliners, Cloud9 New York, last year in Modern Warfare 2-1-3 events with Priesta, and made an interesting decision going into this offseason by replacing Priesta for Dante, aka SIB, coming off of 2 years with the Seattle Surge. And I think it was at the time, it was a heavily kind of discussed move. And I think rightfully so, because there's always risk in making a change after you win champs. But I kind of understood the thought process from New York to try and kind of increase their skill level and try to catch up and compete with, Optic that made a change, Atlanta FaZe that made a change, Toronto that made a change. And I think the theme of this team this year is just massive inconsistencies. They're like a roller coaster you see at Cedar Park or Universal or at whatever Disney property you're on. They didn't have a great start to the season online and on land. They basically got dead last at Major 1. They followed up with a decent showing at Miami, but they were never really a factor to win that one. At Major 3, they got out pretty early in Toronto on that Sunday. Again, same thing, losers bracket, lose early, don't really make it to winners or losers finals or grand finals. But I think starting with Major 4, in which Optic really struggled the event, Toronto really struggled, New York came through losers bracket in a surprise victory against Atlanta FaZe in that grand final. They followed up that momentum with a second place at COD champs, but they got kind of bowled over by Optic in those finals. And then unfortunately, they ran up to Optic again at Esports World Cup, in which they got top 6, single win kind of format at that event. I think if New York hadn't have lost earlier on in the group stage and gotten upset, then maybe they would have been on the bottom side of the bracket. They probably would have made it deeper. Maybe had gotten a minimum top 4, but instead, because of their upset early in that tournament, they ended up having to play Optic early and just didn't do much in that series and got top 8. I actually don't like the way that Breaking Point lists these, because it's really 9th, 12th, 5th to 8th, but anyway, get my point. For New York, it was super up and down. And I want to demonstrate, even just talking about online, because online is a big portion of how the season's run. They had a great showing, at Major 1 online. They were 6-1, although they won quite a few game 5s. But you see that they basically got double rounded at that first event. Online at Major 2, they were actually pretty good again, 6-1. But this is the event where they lost to Optic early on Sunday. But then when the inconsistency started to show in the middle of the season, here you see their Major 3 qualifier stretch was one where they went 3-4, but they were able to actually get a decent placing at this event, gain 4th. And then Major 4, online 4-3, and this is actually their best placing because they made that losers bracket run, right? Lost to FaZe earlier on in the tournament, beat everybody in losers bracket, and then beat FaZe in the rematch in the finals, and then had champs that wasn't online. So by the middle of the season, you can see they kind of were a little bit the 19-9 record is not as clean as some of the other top teams online. I think sort of the weird takeaway for New York when you kind of look at these stats is that as a respawn team, they were not as dominant as the other top teams, right? They're still winning at a decent clip. But the only thing is when you're sort of in that 55-50 range win percentage, it kind of really generally sure shows that teams kind of have up and down form. And you're winning 6 out of 10 times, you can kind of deal with one bad map because you're going to split, where New York got in trouble in a couple of 3-1s, especially at LAN, where they just didn't take both respawns. And they had some good maps. The Rio hardpoint run was very, very good. But you see for most of these hardpoint maps, once the old maps are rotated out, they weren't the best 6-star hardpoint team. They were, up and down in Vista by the end of the season. Their sub base really wasn't that good all year. And then on the control side, you like a couple of really big invasion control wins they had at LAN, but you see that the high-rise control kind of came back to earth. And there's some other maps that they kind of had a really good start and form on and kind of petered off on, like high-rise S&D. They started off 4-0 on the map, and then actually started off 6-1 by through the first 3 stages. Then they finished off going 1-4 at stage 4 and didn't play at a champ. So I think for me, for this New York team, it's just inconsistent form. They really weren't able to rely on a lot of bread and butters this year. And I had heard pretty much all season that their practice was inconsistent as well. And I keep saying this, and I know you're probably sick of hearing it, but if your practice is inconsistent, the results are going to be inconsistent. It's just kind of how it is. It doesn't mean you can't win. If your practice is inconsistent, it's just going to be much harder to pull that off. So I think the biggest kind of thing that I think New York has to work on this offseason is either via mentality or via roster adjustments here. Tried to be as consistent as, say, Phasar, and get to a little bit of a higher win percentage. You don't got to get to 77.5%. It's insane. But you want to get in the 60s of these game modes, and I think they'll be able to win a lot cleaner both online and at LAN. I think have better than just kind of 2 LAN showings all year. Because I just think if you're this New York team, there's no way that you're happy with, yeah, you played good at the end of the season, got a first, second, but you won 1 event, and in 4 of the 5 LANs, you didn't even make it to winners or a losers final. I just don't see how they're happy with that situation. All right, so what is New York going to do in this offseason? So the big question is Cloud9 coming in. What does it mean for the finances of this team? Sort of long-term direction. Obviously, Cloud9, if you've been following them the last couple of years, through the whole kind of COVID thing, they have not been the biggest spenders at times. But I do think, based on what Jack has said on Reddit, that they are probably still going to try and build sort of a championship team here. And if you remember my last video, with the Toronto situation, could go either or way. I don't really see that with New York. This is not really kind of a blow-up situation here. I think the key thing is that what can you do to improve the consistency of this team? Because as good of a season as Kismet had last year, if you look at these numbers, he was just not that good overall for most of the year. When they were playing really, really good, and if you scroll here, like at the Major 4 tournament, you see that Kiz's numbers were fantastic. A 1-2 in search, 117 in hardpoint, and a 0.93 in control. Like, that is fine. But you see when they got in trouble was when Kismet was really struggling at these LANs, and online he was still pretty good. Major 2 qualifier, 1.17 on online, 0.87 on LAN. Like, that split is a huge problem, and that X factor ability wall was really, the potential is there. It's just kind of hard to sort of live with the inconsistency in a sort of situation where other top teams just have consistent LAN performers. So could Kiz be rotated out? I think the argument against it is that the submachine gun market isn't really the greatest right now, and it's not like they're going to go pick up Kyler for Kismet type deal. You could try maybe exploring like one of these sort of more 18-year-old type players, but does New York really want to go in that direction? I just don't think there's a lot of proven SMGs that are really going to be a upgrade for Kismet rather than being kind of a side move with different pros and different cons. But if we do want to entertain a couple of options, let's go through the list here. First off, you've got TJ Halley coming off a pretty good season for Carolina. Now, the only knock on TJ, I would say, because the S&D player would be great with TJ. You're not really going to lose anything rotating Kiz for TJ out in search. The only thing is you might lose some of that ceiling in respawn as good as TJ is. He generally does not play well against top teams, so you'd get to the end of a tournament. It wouldn't be the best for TJ. Unless you can improve that, I just don't see that as a realistic option for this team. I think Fame is unfortunately too inconsistent to really be considered here, but I do see Fame getting on a spot. I think Estrio could be a very interesting second sub option if they really think that he can continue to develop. So keep your eye on this one, because I actually don't hate potentially Estrio coming in here for either a sub or an AR situation. We're talking about U18 players. Derek is a player who just turned 18, just became eligible. A lot of chatter about him. Definitely an unknown situation, I think, if he were to come in here. So that would be a risky move. I skipped over a few players like Stanley and Reese, by the way. I just think for what New York needs, consistency from teammate, I just think that would probably eliminate those players. Johnny, Nero, I think for different reasons than that. I just think they're not going to be the ceiling type players that New York wants. Now, if you want a similar player to Kismet, but you want to swap him out, you could go Charlie Hicks. He did win last year with Toronto Ultra. The only knock on Charlie, just not a elite tier a sub slay SMG, so maybe that kind of takes him off the list. And that kind of the last potential like SMG option is Yuli, who I thought actually didn't look too bad at EWC. But again, I think that's just sort of more a raw risky option. So you get to my point here. It's just like, and we didn't talk about Kyler. We did kind of in a little bit. He's sort of the one person on here that isn't listed as an FA yet. I gotta kind of update this, but yeah, you kind of get my point. Like, I don't see free agent options. Now, if you want to go outside the box, Minnesota have nobody on their team. Linz is sitting there kind of solo. You want to maybe try to buy out Linz. The kind of chatter on Linz behind the scenes is very interesting. So the Linz chatter is obviously, he had a pretty good start to the year, kind of tailed off towards the end of the year, but could have hit the rookie wall. I think the chatter amongst a lot of people from ex-teammates on Rocker is, is Linz going to take a big enough jump in the second and third year to do the things you want to be a championship player? Like team being teammate wise, the grind, like the rookie wall thing kind of puts people off a little bit on that question. But you can't really knock his potential. And he had a lot of series early where he like hard carried this team. So I could see a world where Cloud9 think about it, right? Paco, Lynn's kind of France connection. I think you would have to negotiate a buyout with G2. It might be a little bit tricky. But that's a potential outside the box option if you want to go down that path. You could also go with the Snoopy situation, similar to Lynn's. Good start, bad ending. Could he be a good kind of top level teammate, communication, decision making? Maybe. Same kind of thought process. If you want to try and spin the dice on a potentially talented player, it's not the worst idea. But I think that's really it. I just don't see Gwyn being a realistic option to get. I just think Carolina's going to want to build upon him, but you never know. Everybody's got a price on that front. Then obviously Nasty or Joe and Kremp, if Thieves do make some swaps here, could be options. And then obviously getting to my conversation from yesterday, if Toronto decide to blow it up, Envoy, CleanX, potentially very interesting SMG options who could be clear upgrades here. So if Toronto blow it up, I'm going to assume then New York is going to be very much in that conversation, try and get a couple of players. So that's really like kind of the things I would do if they wanted to rotate Kisman out. I'm gonna be honest, it's possible that New York may just kind of keep Kiz and just kind of assume this is a bad season and give him sort of another year, half a year to kind of pan it out. I think more likely is the AR conversation. This one's a little bit interesting because you would think that based on the way that this year went, right? If I pull up the team stats and scroll down here, you would think looking at these stats that maybe Caesar Skies is the one that you would rotate out. But I've kind of heard a lot of chatter about this team. And we talked about it earlier on in the year with Dante, that it hasn't always been the cleanest fit with the squad as far as like how they all want to play. So I could see New York being like, our trio has been very good. We brought Dante in, we won an event, it didn't really work out. Let's try and swap him for another AR. So I could really go either way for Skies or SIB, but I wouldn't rule out necessarily Dante being the one who gets removed from the roster here or traded. So if we want to talk about AR options, let's start with free agents who could be interesting. Obviously, depending on which AR goes out here, Austin Liticote Slasher could be a decent add. I don't think Austin played terrible this year. The Boston situation was awful, and Austin would have that championship mindset. But I think Austin's as control is going to be a little bit better, so I'd be a little bit concerned about that move. Priesthood could be interesting. Preston obviously has teamed with these players before. They know what they get, but do you really want his and Preston on a team again? They had kind of even that last year, right? They won 3 events. They also had events where they played really poorly because Respawn was kind of get back to the same thing with Priest and Kiz. Gave him 2 X Factor players. Capsule Beans, both interesting options. Both got room to develop. I just don't see them being super high on the list of players I think they'd want to pick up. I don't see Clay going to New York here. He already had one go around with this organization. It didn't really go well. And Clay's, I think, a little too inconsistent with what they're looking for right now in this stage of Clay's career. Diamond Con, similar situation. As good as Connor had some series, he also had some bad series as well. So I just don't see Connor being super serious in the consideration here, unfortunately. Cammy could be an interesting option, but again, Cam at the top level pro slang hasn't always been the best. Well, I didn't play too bad either, but we'll see. Geo could be an interesting one. Had a pretty good season for Vegas. Still has a lot of work to do to continue to kind of develop as a player, but he had a good start, so probably a name you should at least consider. Would they bring in Gunless? I thought Pierce's stint on Rocker was interesting. He's obviously not going to be a passive team. We'll just say that. And so maybe they don't want to introduce that kind of personality anymore. I don't think Lamar is consistent enough for what they're looking for. Big Wake could be interesting if they think they can continue to develop Wake. I actually think, though, they'd probably consider Alec and Ender probably more over Wake. Alec had a decent end of the year in Challengers, was playing very good in S&D. And I could see them thinking about Alec and Ender. Ender's obviously more of a question mark because I just don't know what's going on with the guy. But let's see if either of those two guys are grinding with some of the New York players when the beta comes out this weekend. That might be a big tell, but I actually think 2 of these might be near the top of the list. One event before, good search players. Respawn always up and down, but like S&D first is always be New York's mantra, I think. Cobra could be very interesting here. Obviously, he's been connected a lot to Rocker, but the Paco connection, you go double France, could be interesting. Brack had a solid season. Same with Exceed, but I just don't know if they did enough on the FC Black team to really get consideration on a top team like New York, unfortunately. Now we get to some interesting options here. So Formal, I haven't talked a lot about Formal in this free agent thing. The only thing with the Formal situation is I don't know how serious he is about coming back. I don't know if he's trolling. And realistically, he's not really going to be able to full commit until after Worlds for Halo, although I guess he could kind of, put his hat in the ring now and just say, I'm going to finish off the season with Halo and pre-announce the team I'm going to be on. He'd obviously have to leave off to do that. I don't know if he would go to New York here. I think more likely Thieves. If he was going to any organization, he's going to do it be Thieves. But stranger things have happened in past years. Matt coming back and going to New York. He already had one stint before, and they did win an event online in Model for 2019. Has chemistry with Dante. Not a terrible shout. Obviously, questions about him skipping last year. I know he was dealing with some family stuff. Paul has been on New York before. Up and down kind of situation when he was there. Obviously, love the talent, but will he have that championship teammate mindset? Has he worked on the things on that kind of issue in the last year? Questions, obviously, only Paul can really answer on that front. Obviously, Donnie could be an interesting option, having been on New York before. Don didn't have the best challenger season. The bet on himself did not pay out, so I'm really curious what he's going to do. If you want to go with more of a U18 option, you got Encourage and you got Ryan, kind of raw players, so that could be an interesting kind of thought process here. Dylan Rex at the bottom of this list. Had a pretty good season for FC Black, but I just don't think he's consistent enough for what they're looking for. So some really good AR options actually out there. AR market on the free agent list is much better than the sub market, and there is a lot of directions New York could go here potentially if they wanted to do some stuff. As far as like the buyout kind of market for ARs, a lot of them did get kind of released. I think maybe the only realistic options here, well, there's one realistic option, then we'll get to the second one. Byron Ashley, again, if Thieves kind of make changes and want to upgrade and Byron hits the market, it could be an interesting option. I think Byron played pretty good at the end of this year. Obviously, Dylan Attach is being allowed to explore options. So you could bring Dylan in New York. That could be really interesting. Dylan's a good teammate and is, he's had championship experience. He's got a ring. Like, Dylan's good. Dylan could be a really good option here. I think the most, I hate to use this word, sexy option, the one that the fans would want the most is this. But the thing with Scrap is, again, assuming that Toronto would let him go, it would be an expensive buyout, which New York haven't shown recently, and Cloud9 haven't shown recently they're willing to pay that. But he would make the team better for either Dante or Skies. You can't really deny that would be an upgrade. It's like, would they pull the trigger on that one? So we'll see if any rumors trickle out. But I think my sound bet with New York is like, there are ways that they can upgrade pretty much everybody that's not Paco on this roster. There are obviously a lot of side moves they can do that I think would be negligible at best. But I won't be surprised if New York makes one or two changes this year. They got to do something because this team was very inconsistent this year. Between them and Toronto, they were really the third and fourth best teams amongst the top four this year. And neither of them had an amazing EWC. New York had a better end of the season with the Major 4 win and a good showing at Champs. But I don't think it was enough for this team to stick as a 4. But maybe they run it back and give it a go. If they don't like any of the market options, we'll see what happens over the next few months. So let me know what you guys think of some of the kind of exploration here of options for New York. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more. And as always, guys, we'll see you on the next one.